Boy, Saturday at 6:05 goes together with Arn Anderson like peas and carrots, does it not?
I was sitting home when this idea came to me, and I was just sitting there thinking, when I watch ESPN 3030 or any of those shows, where they go back and they tell you about athletes or movie stars or normal people or whatever. And for me, the most interesting part is growing up, their childhood, their teenage years, before they were a star. How did they get there? That's the stuff that really rivets with me and it fascinates me. And I thought, I've certainly got one of those to tell. Before you look at somebody where they are in life, you might look at where they've been and where they started, and that could tell a lot of tales. So that's the idea of starting at the very beginning, back to the very beginning, and we'll go from there. The life story of how Marty Lundy became Arn Anderson. Rome, Georgia, little bitty town. I was born 1958, and let's just say my mom was too young to be having a baby, and my father probably was not going to be dedicated or that interested in being a father. So my grandmother, seeing this and figuring this out pretty quickly, when it was time to go home, she just scooped me up, and my grandparents took me to their house. Every time I talk about my grandmother, grandfather, I get, a lot of tweets and a lot of reactions of people that were raised by their grandparents. And I think they are the unsung heroes, basically, of parenting, to be honest with you. Hats off to people that have a mother or a father in the picture growing up, much less both. I happen to have grandparents because of the fact that I did have an absentee mother and a non-existent father. When you grow up with people that don't have to raise you because it's their obligation, but do it out of love and because they want to, I think you receive a special upbringing, whether it's kids that are orphans, and are taken in. I just think that when you're wanted in a home, it's a different kind of thing. And I was a chubby kid growing up too, and things were just. And I know I'm kind of stuttering through this, but it was a tough time. When you're a fat kid and you're very poor, our home had no air conditioning, and that's a big deal when you live in the South. Wooden floors. My grandmother smoked. Her only vice was she smoked those Camels, and one after another in a house that is shut up, basically, with no air conditioning and just operating off of fans. Not a big fan of cigarette smoke. No offense to smokers, that's just me. And I really didn't notice it as much growing up because it was part of my everyday life. But, when I would go to someone else's house, like Bob Moss's, who had air conditioning and people didn't smoke in the house and all that stuff, it was like, wow, this is refreshing. God almighty. Not that was a big deal, because the love that my grandmother and grandfather bestowed on me was worth anything incidental like no air conditioning. They taught me more about life than anybody ever has. My grandfather taught me, no matter what, son, you take care of your family, no matter what. And then it's a little house, albeit wood floors, no air conditioning, very, very small home. He said to me one time, son, this house is paid for. Nobody can ever take it away from your grandmother or you. It's yours. You will have a house to live on. It's not much, but it's yours. And my grandmother basically just taught me to live on a budget. There's the stories about when I was a kid, putting the Little Debbies in the cart and her taking them back out and looking at me and going, can't afford them this week, maybe next week. And that was all part, at the time, it pissed me off. I was wanting those Swiss cake rolls, but she gave me the reason why I couldn't have them. Pissed me off then, and I figured out later in life, man, that's what you do. Life is all about choices. You make the right choices, you'll be okay. And my father, I talked to him one time on the phone, and it was to request a small amount of money. You know, he sent his child support checks now to his credit every week. You know what the amount was? $15 a week. When that don't go very far, but that's what the court at that time, of course, it was a million years ago, but that's what they dictated he pay. And every week the $15 was there. I called him one time, I want to say, to ask for $50. I wanted to have like a roller skating party for my birthday. And I don't remember which birthday it was. That was met with, sorry, I'm on going through some rough times right now. Won't be able to do that for you. So it's the last time I spoke to him. So my mom, once again, I don't blame her. I've looked back on all the things that I had to go through. And there was a time that I was very bitter because when you're young, it's tough. But you get embarrassed very easily. Let's just say my mother had an alcohol problem for as long as I can remember. And she ran through 3 or 4 husbands. And every time she would come and try to take me out of the house, that would last about half a night. And I would get on the phone, call my granddad. My granddad would come pick me up. My mom decided she would marry one of her husbands, and I was about 15 years old. And she comes in the house one night, and or just about dusk, and she's bleeding like a stuck pig. Yeah, her husband decided he was going to drink a fifth of Old Crow and hit her in the head with a sword, split her wide open. So I looked at this, looked at her. She's apologizing for him. So I get on my bicycle. I didn't have transportation, and I rode my bicycle down there. But before I left, she looked at me, and in so many cases of abuse, she said, don't go down there. Don't go down there. And I said, no, I'm going. And she said he was a carpet layer by occupation. She said, don't go, Marty. He'll cut you. Now, being told as a 15-year-old who's going down to fight a grown man that he'll cut you is pretty disturbing. And it makes you think for a second. But I get my baseball bat and I jump on my bicycle and I go down there. And let's just say that ended badly for him. But there's something about being 15 and still having some purity in your heart and in your mind. I knew how bad and how wrong that was to have been taking place. But he never touched my mother again. They never resided in the same house again. And it was one of those things that early in life you figure out sometimes you got to do some really disturbing things in your life to set things right. And that was one of those things that I'll never forget. I didn't feel better about myself ever having done it, but it's one of those things you do. You defend your mom. So let's just say, once again, thank God I had 2 loving parents to go home to. And then the other 3 or 4 husbands that filtered through during the course of over the years, it was, none of them wanted to be a dad. I think they wanted to just play house with my mother. My mother never became a mother. She was just somebody that had a kid. And the alcohol, controlled her life. My grandmother never drank a drop the entire time that I knew her. However, I did see that she caught my grandfather towards the end of his life. Turns out he developed cancer that nobody knew. And the last, say, year and a half, 2 years of his life, she caught him like there was a pint liquor bottle. She caught a couple times in the clothes hamper. There was found liquor in the dryer. And we thought, and I remember her and him getting into heated discussions about it. She just thought he was a drunk. And that was her explanation. As we found out later, he had developed bone cancer. And for those that have had it, I'm assuming they're telling the truth. I don't know why they wouldn't be, but they say it's one of the most painful things there are because it's in your bones. And other than go to a doctor, which people of his era didn't go to a doctor, and he still had a family to complete, taken care of in his mind, and not going to work wasn't an option, and all those different things. So the way he numbed the pain was he had bottles of liquor hid around the house, and he would drink a bunch of liquor till it would knock him out so he could go to sleep and get up at 4:30 in the morning to go cut hair again. So that was the experience that, he was drinking, but I got it big time. And he looked at me one day after my grandmother had chewed him out and took a portion of a bottle and threw it away. And he looked at me and he said, "Son, I hurt." And those words cut me in half because he wasn't pleading. He was just stating a fact so that I understood. 9 through 12, I discovered Little League Baseball. And man, I loved it. To this day, I think I went ahead and played 13, 14, which was called Pony League in Rome. It was for your 13, 14-year-olds. So I played about 6 years of baseball, which I absolutely loved playing. Being that fat kid, and let's just say it, I was a fat kid, and it was my own fault because my diet probably was not the best. But anyway, I started playing midget football. Now in Rome, we had mites, it was peewees, mites, junior midget, senior midget. The problem I ran into was right out the get-go, I couldn't make weight for any of that lower football. I was immediately playing senior midgets when I was 2 or 3 years younger than the other kids. And as you know, that's a pretty good gap at that age. But what I didn't know and what I wasn't aware is I was getting thumped by all these older kids. I was also playing with kids that were at a higher level, which was making me better. And I didn't know it at the time. So that when my age group caught up to me at senior midgets, I'd already been playing with the bigger, older guys. So inadvertently, it gave me an advantage. Then things started to get fun, and football and baseball were my sports until I got to high school, my freshman year, and I discovered amateur wrestling. Rocky Johnson. And it wasn't even about the match. I was in Rome. I was a teenager, probably 17, 18. I'm not sure how old I was, 15. Could have been younger than that. But he walked in the gym in Rome Thursday night, had on a tank top, pair of sweats, carrying his bag. I'd never seen a physique like that in person. It blew me away. Nobody looked like that in Rome that I'd ever seen. It was when he was in his best, probably, shape of his career. And he just looked incredible. And it just had such, I want to say it was younger. I want to say maybe 14, but it's what inspired me to start working out. I want to look like him. Obviously, never got there, but it was a goal. He looked just that impressive to me. Floored me that a human being could look like that. High school, it was this was a time when you didn't ask, coaches didn't go around and ask kids what they wanted to do. They would say, are you playing football? Coach would kind of make the rounds at PE and stuff and start looking the kids over. You're going to play football? Yes, sir. I'd love to play JV football. Okay. Then you'll be at, I suppose that you're not a great basketball player that I don't see there, are you? Or a track star? No, sir. Well, then you'll be on the wrestling team. They didn't ask. They told you. You know what? Sports was one thing that Rome had. There was like 7 high schools around Rome, believe that or not. And football was big. Georgia wrestling was big as far as amateur wrestling, bigger than you would think. So it was my first time being conditioned at that level. Wrestling practice, I think any amateur wrestler will tell you, is the hardest thing they've ever done. And I will back that up 100%. Wrestling practice is incredible, but you get in incredible shape as well. And that's the first time I lost all the baby fat, started lifting weights, and I saw, I actually got skinny for the first time. I wrestled 145 as a freshman. Sophomore, junior years, 167 I ended up at. And it just did more for your confidence. It did more for keeping you out of trouble, because when you can't eat, and you certainly, if you're drinking at that age, junior in high school, a lot of people start, a lot of guys, but you can't drink, you can't eat. You got to be very, very careful that you make weight, or all that hard practice is just for nothing. So I wasn't a state champion or anything like that. I won a couple of regional tournaments, which would have put me in the state tournament, but I got hurt my junior year practicing, actually, before the state tournament actually went down. So it did a lot for my confidence. It did a lot for me as a human being, and more so starting at about 8 years old, just kind of backtracking a little bit. The thing that was always in the back of my mind, no matter what else I did, I wanted to be a professional wrestler. I wanted to be a wrestler about 8 years old, and from the point I was hooked, that's all I ever wanted to do. But it was like a pipe dream to me. Bob Moss, who was my best friend and is still my good friend, and I just recently saw in Rome, and I would call him. Now, this is 8 years old, and say, you got to come down here. You got to come see this. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Well, waiting for him up on the couch by the door that came into our house was me in my underwear with a face mask toboggan and a shoestring down in my underwear. So as he came in, I jumped off the couch, wrapped the shoestring around his throat, and was trying to choke him out with a mask on, 8 years old. Before I got in the business, and my friends in Rome, Georgia, Tony Zane, myself, Kenny Green, Pee Wee, when we would be riding around town drinking and rednecking and all that stuff, well, we were cutting promos on each other back then, because we're all wrestling fans. And people may think that's goofy, but I still use some of that stuff, over the years. And it was just being a smart ass and being a heel. And I always had that mentality of being a wise ass. It was Georgia Championship Wrestling. It was 605. That's the big show that got me started a little bit later. But early on, the first wrestling show that I remember seeing was out of Chattanooga. Ed Capral was the announcer. and I think it would have had to have been Nick Goulas's product. That's the one that first caught my eye. Then as I got a little bit older, as a teenager, I started to see guys like Dick Slater, Bob Orton Jr. wrestling too, some of those guys. And Rocky Johnson, he was the first guy that I saw that had a physique like, God almighty, I want to look like that. But my heroes were Dick Slater, Bob Orton Jr. Just because I began to, as a teenager, you look through different eyes, and I started to see those guys were the ones causing all the excitement. It wasn't necessarily Tommy Rich and Wrestling 2 and those guys. Slater and Orton were the guys making things happen, and it was, wow. It took on a new meaning for me. When I was younger, there was a wrestling show that I think would have been Nick Goulas' show. I think it was out of Chattanooga. And I caught some of that, but mostly the one that had the influence on me was Georgia Championship Wrestling. That's for sure. I think my grandfather would watch a little bit of it, but to be honest with you, he worked so hard. What I remember most about him, and it's clear as a bell, he had one of these 9-band big radios when they first came out. He would cut hair all day. He was a barber, cut hair probably from 6 to 6, come home, eat a little dinner, go work his garden for an hour, and then he would come in and listen to the Braves. And more so than watching wrestling, I was the only one watching wrestling. My granny wouldn't have dreamed, of watching it. It was kind of, I had the TV all to myself, and he would listen to the Braves on the radio and fall asleep in his chair. And I was kind of sit there and just by myself, just sit there and fantasize about being a wrestler. Him and a preacher who was also one of his best friends shared the shop, 2-seater. And right across the street, I've told the story before, was the Projects. And when I was little, on Sunday, my granddaddy would get me, and about every other Sunday or every third one, he would take me down and he would cut my hair. But a couple of times I went down to the shop, and he said, "You want to make some extra money?" And he would let me sweep up all the hair and sit there for a couple hours. And because they were pretty busy, they had the firemen, policemen, all those guys, construction workers. And man, I was sweeping that hair up, putting it in the bag. Well, every other week, there would be a group of kids that he would have come down to the shop, and I would be sweeping up the hair. And there was a couple of times I would come in and they would get there before me. And what he had done was had given them all a haircut free, and he was letting them sweep up the hair. And I went to grab the broom, which that was my job, I thought. And he came over, he put his hand on my hand, and he said, "Son, let them do it. They're learning something." And he was teaching them, get a little work in, get a little pay in. But what he was really doing was giving them a free haircut. I didn't understand that at the time until a little bit later. I figured it out. And that's just the kind of man he was. His only day off from cutting hair was Sunday. And he would take a half a day off on Wednesday to take my grandmother to the grocery store. It was clockwork. But on Sunday, he would snag those fishing poles. He would head out and he would go to his fishing pole retreat, or he would, if it was hunting season, he would go hunting. He took at least Sunday morning and part of the afternoon for him, which I didn't really notice that until I got a little bit older and he started carrying me with him. He bought me a shotgun. He taught me how to quail hunt. He was not a deer hunter. His theory was you had to earn your prize. And buddy, if you're walking through the woods at 8 o'clock in the morning and quail flies up in front of you, if you knock him down, you earned it, because it ain't easy. So he was a bird hunter. He had two bird dogs that were Cracker Jack, liver spot pointers. It was before I went on the road. I would have probably been 20, 21, 22, somewhere in there. During that time, I had started to, I still wanted to be a wrestler in the back of my mind, but my jobs, once I got out of high school, the first job I had, I was pushing pipe in the ditch for the water department. $2.82 an hour. Then I started to learn how to run a backhoe. Same pay, a little bit more upscale job. Then I got for Rome what was a pretty good job. It's called warehouse groceries. So I got a job unloading trucks and grinding hamburger meat and putting chicken in trays, which is like all simple stuff when you work in a meat department. And I started powerlifting in the afternoon, which was giving me more confidence. I was getting stronger. It made my job easier unloading those trucks at 3 o'clock in the morning, boxes of meat in a freezer. And so that evolved into assistant market manager, believe it or not. But I still had this thing in the back of my head about wanting to wrestle. I could not get it out of my head. And we would go sometimes when they would come to Rome on a Thursday, Pee Wee Anderson and myself, the referee. And man, I was just fascinated by it. But I continued to work, that job was a good job in Rome. It actually paid well, and there weren't that many in Rome, to be honest with you. I got a call, and my grandmother was on the phone and said, "You need to get to the hospital." And apparently he had, other than pay the money, we had had a storm and there were some shingles that were blown off the roof. So he decided he had the bright idea of going up on top of the house and fixing that himself. And as he was climbing up the ladder slipped. He fell off. And it's ironic that that's what happened. But as he was falling, the clothesline that my grandmother hung the clothes on was close enough that when he fell off that ladder, he actually clotheslined himself, but on the jaw and across his lip. And he knocked out a few teeth and it split his lip really bad. So it was bad enough that he had to go to the hospital. And as they got him in there and they started talking to him a little bit, they figured out more was going on. They admitted him. They did some tests. That's where they found that he had pretty advanced cancer. And I don't know if it was from the concussion of the fall, what exactly it was, but it led to, in 4 days, he was gone. He had passed away. He never recovered. So she was by herself there, and she was afraid to be in the house alone. Thank God her sister was still alive, and she came down from North Carolina and lived with her for a while, which helped, just knowing that somebody was there. And but it was a rough time. Of course, she had no income coming in. Whatever she had tucked away, the job that I had, I was still living at home, so I gave her everything that I made, with the exception of enough money to have, a little bit of spending money and gas money, and that's it. And I gave the rest to her to run the house. It was some tough times after my grandfather died. My friend Bob Moss, that name keeps coming up, actually opened up a Bob's Body Shop, which was a gym. And him being my best friend, I could train free. And Bob was like a amateur bodybuilder. He competed a few times, but not that many. But he basically was just more of a trainer, training the people that worked out at his gym, and that was his interest. And he had a really good physique. He still looks great. So he provided that platform, and there was a couple of guys in there that came in from across town, another gym, and they had started Olympic lifting, which is different from powerlifting, obviously. And I saw that took way too much technique. It took way too much skill. But I noticed that they were doing, heavy squats to help them with their Olympic lifting. And I started squatting, and then I noticed they were doing deadlifts to help them with those clean and jerks. So the two were kind of closely tied together, but being different in the actual competition of them. And I started squatting, and I saw my overall strength started to go up. My bench started to go up. My incline started to go up. Squats will do that for you. It'll make you stronger all over, weighted squats. And I just saw so much progress, and my body started to change. My job got easier. Those boxes got lighter, because that was a very real deal. 3 days a week, we would have a big, 18-wheeler truck back up to the grocery store, open the doors at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'd have to unload maybe 50, 60 boxes of 80, 90-pound meat and stack them in a cooler. So it was a difficult job. That got easier. Life just in general got easier. And I really enjoyed it. And, as far as guys that are just first start working out and all that stuff, I would suggest it for building a foundation and building strength and getting a good grasp on getting stronger. So I was at the stadium, Barron Stadium. It's where the high school football was played on Friday night. But I was over there after I was through working out with the weights. I stopped there and I was running, and I, ran a couple miles, whatever it was. It wasn't a whole hell of a lot. And as I was leaving, it happened to be a Thursday that Georgia Championship Wrestling was in town. And as I was leaving to get in my car, Ted Allen pulled up and got out of his car, and I immediately recognized him. And then it hit me. I went, oh, God, it's Thursday. I bet they're wrestling here. So I went up to him. He was opening his trunk, and I think I said, hello, sir. My name is so-and-so. I recognize you off television. You're a wrestler, correct? He said, yeah, sure am. And I said, well, I don't know how to even ask this, but how would someone like me start to begin to, be a wrestler? How would I get in the wrestling business? Now, in that day and era, most wrestlers would have looked at me and said, you can't, or, F off, or whatever the case may be, or beat it. It just so happened he was a nice man, and he looked me over. He says, so what are you doing over here? I guess he was making sure I wasn't stalking. He said, I see you're all sweaty. What are you doing over here? I said, well, I just got done running. I got through lifting weights earlier and stuff. I love what you do. I would love to be able to do that. It's all I've ever wanted to do since I was 8 years old. And when he figured out that I was legitimate, at least in my story, he said, well, I'll tell you what, hold on. He wrote down his name and number. He said, if you got $500, I'll train you myself. Here's my number. You think about it. You let me know. So I called him the next day. I didn't have $500, but my granny did. And I said, I think I have a shot. Well, I'm talking to, she said, okay, I'll let you have the money if you're sure. But son, that's a lot of money in this house. I hope you're not going to just throw it away. And I said, no, I assure you, I will get that money back to you as soon as I possibly can. Well, there were no wrestling schools. It didn't exist. The deal was you had to have someone, usually in a one-on-one situation, look at you that was willing to put his name on you, train you, and then call in favors or whatever it may be to get you booked, doing jobs on TV, doing jobs on those shows on the weekends. And that was how you got discovered. Another friend of mine heard me talking about this opportunity, and his dad, his name was Mal and Ted Hicks. They owned Hicks Furniture Store. Jerry, who has popped in and out of the gym several times, really a nice man. He knew my story, no parents growing up and all that stuff. He said, you really want to do this? I said, yeah, I sure do. He said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll make it easy for you. Get me in touch with this Ted Allen. I got room in the back of my furniture store. I'll see if he knows how to buy a ring. I'll put a ring back there and give you all a place to train. So when I told Ted, not only did I have the $500, Tony Zane, friend of mine growing up, he as well wanted to train. I said, how would you feel about training a couple of us? He said, well, yeah, that won't make a difference. I said, we have the money. And there was a third guy, David McGee. We all had $500. Ted had a big day that day. And I said, we have a guy that's going to put a ring. If you can find us one or sell one, and he's going to put it right here because, we have jobs. We still have to keep our job, obviously. And he said, well, yeah, obviously. So Ted or Mr. Hicks bought the ring from Ted, put it in his store, and that we started training from that time. Ted Allen trained me, and first thing he taught you was footwork, circling the ring. Next thing was lock up, nice and solid. Keep your head up, keep your eyes forward, a nice solid lock up. First thing you learned was grab a headlock and how to snatch a headlock and how to get there and make it look viable and believable and credible. Then it went tackle. You shoot a guy off, take a tackle. Yes, sir. Then it went tackle, drop down, hip toss. For some reason, that was just a sequence that was easy. It was smooth. The guys were coming off the ropes. His momentum allowed you to hip toss him and take him over. You used his momentum against him. Then it went to tackle, drop down, reverse the hip toss. Okay, the business was evolving now. Then it went to tackle, drop down, reverse the hip toss, reverse it again. And if you remember this one from watching matches, a guy would do that second reversal and the guy would go out over the top from the hip toss. Now we're getting into the high flying stuff for that era. That was a big bump for those days. That would be a sequence. There's an unwritten rule in the business that if a guy snatches an arm or snatches a hold, say he grabs a headlock or he dips around behind you and grabs a waist lock, if he just sits there for over a couple of seconds without taking you down or advancing his position, he's wanting you to reverse it. So you reverse it. And if he reverses it again and he sits there for a couple of seconds, reverse it again. You're kind of learning by osmosis. Because if a guy zips in behind you and waist locks you and he's got you, he's going to probably take you up, take you down, ride you a little bit, do a little bit of amateur stuff. If he grabs a headlock, he turns it into a hammer lock. If he just sits there, he's wanting you to reverse it. A lot of it's common sense, but you got to have that move set and knowing how to work those holes. You got to have that on your tool belt, or doesn't matter that he wants something. If you don't know what to do, you don't know what to do. Guys that would just run shows on the weekend. Now, keep in mind, these towns, Boaz, Albertville, they were doing 300 people every week, every Saturday. And for the promoter, he was making out. His top guys were probably getting a fair payoff. As for me, first time, the first time I worked for that promoter, Mickey, he didn't offer to give me anything. The next Saturday, I got pounded again, and he came over and said, well, you did a good job out there. Appreciate it. House is down. Can't pay you anything, but I know you got to eat. So here you go. And he handed me 6 hot dogs. That was my payoff. Well, you know what? I took them, put them in my pocket, and ate them on the way home. I've said I would have wrestled for free. Just don't tell anybody. Well, I was wrestling for free because it probably cost me $30 in gas alone. I might have had 12 to 15 days of training before I was on television. And, just from watching what we had seen on TV, we were able to do some stuff already. And Ted said, well, God, you guys are going to be okay. And we had about, I would say, 8 to 10 workouts twice a week for maybe 5 weeks. And that's where he said, hey, I can get you guys on TV. I can take you to Knoxville and I can get you booked. Now you're going to get a knot pounded in your ass. I'm just going to tell you before you go. That was the least of my worries. So he took us up to Knoxville. And that particular time, Black Jack Mulligan had a territory up in Knoxville. And that's where I saw Kelvin Sullivan for the first time and Black Jack Mulligan for the first time and a bunch of different wrestlers. So we did that TV a couple of times, maybe twice. And then we continued to train. And Ted said, guys, I got incredible news for you. I can get you booked on Atlanta TV. It's the deal. Whether you're going to get thumped or do the thumping, if you show up on that TV, you are seen across the country. The exposure is ridiculous. So we got a couple of weeks of that. And now we're training 3 days a week. And tempo is picked up. And about that 3rd or 4th week of doing television, I got booked against Bob and Brad Armstrong. And that was my break.